Today we're going to look at passive transport and specifically at the processes of osmosis and diffusion. And it's important to remember that in both of these processes we have materials moving, but there's no energy being added. This is why they are passive instead of active transport. First process we're going to look at is osmosis, and this involves water moving across a semi-permeable membrane. So remember that semi-permeable means that some things can go through and others can't, and this is really what makes osmosis happen. Alright, so here we have our cell with this plasma membrane, and I've drawn this plasma membrane as a dashed line because the plasma membrane is semi-permeable. So if we look at the plasma membrane up close, so we have our cell on the left and the plasma membrane separates it from the outside. And on the outside we have a water molecule and a solute or salt molecule. Now if you notice, the solute molecule is much bigger than the water molecule, and that's going to be really what's making this whole process happen. Because if you notice, the water molecule is able to pass right through that plasma membrane, whereas the solute molecule can't. And this is why in osmosis the water is going to be the thing that moves and the solute doesn't. Alright, so once again I have my cell, and on both inside and outside the cell I have water, and within this water I have dissolved solute. So now on the inside I have a little bit, and on the outside I have a whole lot. So this means that I have a higher concentration on the outside and a lower concentration on the inside. This is what's called having a concentration gradient. Gradient, means kind of slope. So think about like a road when it has like an 8% grade or something like that. It has to do with a slope. So in this case, I have a gradient set up because I have differences in concentration. Alright, so remember, the water is going to move to the higher number, which means the water is going to move out. And if the water is moving out of the cell, it's just like a water balloon. If I let water out of the balloon is going to shrink. And in this case, just the same way, the cell is going to shrink. Alright, so let's look at a different set of scenarios. Alright, so we have three beakers set up with similarly sized cells, and they're each in a concentration of 25% solute. So the solution around them is 25%. However, on the inside, I have 10, 25, and 50%. So the first thing I got to do is figure out where's the higher number. Well, on the first one, outside is greater. The second one, they're the same. And then the third one, the inside is greater. So now I can figure out which way the water is going to move. Because remember, the water moves to the higher number. So the water is moving to the higher number. It's going to move out. It's going to move in and out at the same rate because there's no difference. And it's going to move in. Now, once I figured this out, it should be really easy to figure out what's going to happen to the cell. If water moves out, the cell is going to shrink. If water moves in and out of the same way, it's going to stay the same. And if water moves in, it's like adding water to a balloon, it's going to swell. Alright, here's another example. So this is a different scenario. I have this U-shaped container, and I have this semi-permeable membrane that's separating the two sides of the container. On either side of this membrane I have water, and in that water I have some dissolved solute. Now notice that I have a higher concentration on one side than the other, which means that water is going to move. And since water moves to the higher number, it's going to move to that higher concentration. Now I've drawn this line to show you where the original water line is going to be, because if water is moving, then the water level is actually going to shift. There will actually be less water on the right side than on the left side, and the water is going to move to try and equal out the concentration and reach equilibrium. Alright, next we're going to look at the process of diffusion, which is where molecules move from high to low concentration. Now, osmosis is really just the diffusion of water, but for our purposes, what I want you to do is think of diffusion as where the actual molecules of the solute is moving, not the water. Alright, so this is kind of like the classic idea of diffusion. So we have molecules packed into this corner, so there's a really high concentration here in the corner and then a very low concentration everywhere else. This is similar to if you spray some perfume or something like that in the corner of a room, it is going to end up spreading out just like these molecules. And you'll notice the molecules are spread out basically evenly. And again, that is so that they have reached equilibrium. The concentration is now the same throughout the entire space. Now, diffusion can actually happen across the membrane as well. It's not just osmosis. But here's the key difference. In this case, the molecule that I'm looking at is actually able to pass through the membrane. So if the molecule can't pass through the membrane, then we're going to be talking about osmosis, and the water is going to be moving. But if the molecules can pass through, then we're going to be talking about diffusion. All right, so let's take this situation. So I have a membrane, and I obviously have a pretty good concentration gradient going on here. I have a much higher concentration on the left side and a much lower concentration on the right side. Now these molecules are going to move from high to low, so they're going to move from left to right, and they're going to move until both sides have about the same amount so that they have reached equilibrium. So the main things to remember on all of this are, first of all, both of these processes do not require any energy. That's why they're passive transport. And then the second thing is, if the water's moving, it's osmosis. If the solute or some other molecule that's not water is moving, that's what we're going to call diffusion. And those are the two processes of passive transport.